Welcome to Widener University Commonwealth Law School. We are thrilled to provide a forum for Pennsylvania's Auditor General Eugene DePasquale and for several legislators that will be on our panel to discuss the state of Pennsylvania's government. The Law and Government Institute has been very busy this year. We were recently named as one of the top 20 law and government institutes out of the 200 ABA accredited law schools at this time. I think it's a real tribute to the work that Jill and the others have done with that accomplishment. Since joining Widener in July, I've also been excited to see the number of alumni that we have involved at various levels here in Pennsylvania. In addition to our alum, the Auditor General, we have numerous alums on the bench, in the legislature, serving as lawyers throughout state and local government, and we have 5 district attorneys that are alums sprinkled throughout the state. Tonight's event is exactly the kind of activity that our Law and Government Institute was created to sponsor. We hope that Widener Law Commonwealth can provide a neutral forum for the discussion of ideas that can make our federal, state, and local government stronger and better managed. I would now like to introduce Professor Jill Family, the director of our Law and Government Institute.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to this special program, The State of Pennsylvania's Government. Thank you so much to Dean Johnson, to all of the faculty here at Widener Law Commonwealth, and to all of our alumni for your support for the Law and Government Institute. I also want to say a special thanks to Sandy Grafe and Brian Fernbaugh for all their work in making these events possible. And also to my Law and Government Institute student fellows, Patrick Parsons and Jocelyn Schultz, for all of their help as well. And we're honored today to bring together our Auditor General and a panel of legislators to discuss some of the problems affecting Pennsylvania's government. The Auditor General's keynote will be first, and we'll have about a 15-minute break after that, and that will be followed by a discussion with a distinguished panel of legislators. The Law and Government Institute is all about public service. The Institute is dedicated to the study of government law, including the role of lawyers in making and implementing law. At Widener Law Commonwealth, students may earn a certificate in law and government in addition to a JD. Government law is fused into our curriculum here at Widener Law Commonwealth. In fact, as Dean Johnson mentioned, our law school was recently named a top school for public service by Pre-Law magazine. The Institute's mission is founded on the idea that government works, that government is a positive force in our society. At Widener Law Commonwealth, we train lawyers to be a part of that positive force. That being said, we recognize that government is not perfect. Those imperfections are what bring us here today, but we want to talk about those imperfections because we believe in our system of government. We want to improve it. To get our discussion started, it is my great pleasure to introduce our alumnus, the Auditor General of Pennsylvania, Eugene DePasquale. Our 51st Auditor General, Eugene DePasquale, took office in January 2013. Prior to his election to the office of the Auditor General, he was a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Please join me in welcoming Auditor General DePasquale.
Now that's a bio. And the reason why I say that is it was Memorial Day, and I was speaking at the Memorial Day parade in West York, and my kids are actually in the band, and it was around 9,000 degrees that day. And before they let me speak, they read the 72-page bio they had of me, and the kids are dropping like flies, and I'm sitting there going, I was like, I can't wait till they get to the office tomorrow and tell them we got to cut that thing down. So that's a bio. He's the Auditor General, and before that he was a state rep. Get him up here to speak. That's a bio. I think I would sit right over here. We were talking about this a little bit ago. I went to Widener, started in '98, graduated in '02, did the 4-year night program, and boy, yeah, there are those days, especially in the night program, where you wonder how in God's name did you get through it. So, but I do thank Widener. It was a great legal education. The professors were always readily available, And for myself, as having a full-time job in the central part of the state, they allowed the flexibility of doing both, and even with some family challenge. It was my first year during final exams. My brother passed away, and during my second year, my oldest son was born. So that, and still was able to find a way through it. And the school was always flexible in allowing us to make things happen, because when you went to the night program, all of us had. A vast majority of people were married, a big chunk with kids, and some type of a professional job. So that would not have been possible without Widener. So I'm appreciative to them having me here to speak. And I know we're going to talk for a little bit, then open it up for questions. The topic may be the most loaded topic I've ever been asked to speak on. And that is, and this is their quote, not mine, the state of Pennsylvania government. Now, the president gives a State of the Union. And here's the pattern. The first year, they basically always say the State of the Union is horrible because they're coming in to fix it. Then all 7 other years, it's getting stronger until finally at the end, it's as strong as it's ever been. And that's sort of the arc. And look, they fight for what they believe in, and there's, if you survive 8 years in that job, at a minimum, you deserve some credit. Only the governor can really give the state of what the Commonwealth is as far as our law. And so he gives that address every year. This was the first time in the history of our state that the governor gave his second, it's technically called a budget address, but sometimes viewed as a State of the State address, where the first budget wasn't enacted into law. And so the state of Pennsylvania government, I want to start off with this sort of point. There are a lot of good people in both sides, both political parties, a lot of very good people in the executive branch, including the governor, who's a very good, smart person. And there are people in both parties that I admire and are friends of mine, and even some that maybe I'm not as friendly with, but I think are in public service for the right reasons. But right now, our state government isn't working. And it's not that, look, the state police are out there, the prisons are running, like the functions of state government are working in that sense. But if you think about the overall political climate, which I think is partly what the topic is about, it's not working. Why that is, look, you can break it down to a whole bunch of reasons. I think it's how our legislative districts are drawn is part of it. We have legislative districts where, to be blunt, the politicians pick their voters. The voters don't pick their politicians. I feel a little bit of anger about this because when I was in the House, we as Democrats had the majority for 4 years, and it was my bill that would have shifted us to an independent redistricting commission. And you have to say both parties were at fault for this because we as Democrats didn't even put the bill, I didn't even get a hearing on the bill. So then when the Republicans won control in 2010 and got to draw the maps, they wrote the maps to their favor. As a Democrat, I wasn't thrilled about that, but I can also tell you that had the shoe been on the other foot, that's probably what would have happened as well. And you see this across the country, where incumbents only have to worry about a primary, not so much the general election. So I think that's part of it. I think certainly the campaign funding, not so much at the state level, but certainly at the national level, where they opened up the door for these bigger PACs, these independent expenditures. Look, certainly people have the right to express their views, but I think that has opened up a floodgate of negativity on the airways that I think that drives it. And we, all of us as voters, at least if you go by the polling, we our own selves have become more in one camp or the other over the last 10 to 20 years. So I think, remember, our government, many times, we the voters elect the people that serve. So I think all of us have to take a look in the mirror as to what each of us could do to try to improve the situation. And I'm going to go into the specifics on that, and specifically how I think we need to get better as a state government, what we found as Auditor General. But I think from the beginning, I think we all have to not worry about who we're going to blame, but what we can do ourselves to try to change the situation. I've had some recent reports on the state of school districts in Pennsylvania. As the Auditor General, we audit all the school districts, and we have basically gone in and done surveys, and we have tried to come up with what is this budget stalemate actually costing taxpayers, parents, families, the kids that are in the schools. And we've come up with that, and every time, I've done it 3 times, I'll do another one at the end of April. Hopefully it won't be needed, but my gut tells me it will. Vicky, my chief counsel, she, Widener grab, by the way, see, taking over the world. It's a situation where it's costing a lot of money. But every time I'd come out with these press conferences, the first question I would get, and by the way, when I say this, I understand it. If I were in the press, I would probably ask the same question as well. But the question is, who's to blame for this? Now, I get why that question is asked. I'm a Democrat, you have a Democratic governor. Am I going to be siding with the Democratic governor, or am I going to be attacking the legislature? Am I going to be siding with the Republicans in the legislature and attacking the Democratic governor? That's because the game of politics sometimes drives more of the story. When you watch presidential race coverage, forget who you're voting for. Just forget it. Block that out of your mind. Whether you're Hillary, Trump, Bernie Sanders, John Kasich, I guess Rubio's obviously out, Senator Cruz. But block that out for a second and watch the coverage. 90% of it, and I may be lowballing it, is about the horse race. Who's up, who's down, how are you going to win? John Kasich did an interview. And again, now, I'm not saying it's just a show for the guy from Pittsburgh, but John Kasich, look, if John Kasich were the Republican nominee, I want to be clear, I would not be voting for him. I think he's a good man. I don't agree with him on a lot of issues. I think he's in public service for the right reasons. I think he's been, in my take, I think, he's been a pretty good governor for the state of Ohio. And the people there where he's actually governor, they really like him. He probably has a high of approval rating among Democrats as any governor in the country does of the other party. So I give him enormous credit for that. But that is irrelevant for what I'm going to say. He was on, I think it was Hardball. Almost 70% of the show was badgering him as to how he thought he was going to win the race. Well, do you think he doesn't know he has a hurdle to climb to beat Donald Trump for the nomination? Just structurally. But the only way for him to have a chance about that is to actually talk about some of the things that he thinks could appeal to Republican voters to win the nomination and then try to compete in the general election. But once you get behind in a presidential race, and this is going to happen to Senator Sanders very soon, actually already happening now. Once you get behind, every question becomes a horse race question. Watch it now. Yeah. And again, I'm not, realize that it may not be the most exciting television if you're not into politics, but watch some of these shows. It is the whole method of the conversation. Well, Senator Sanders, why are you still in this race? Hillary can't be overcome. Senator Cruz, how are you going to catch Donald Trump in the delegate count? Well, obviously the simple question is I got to win more states. But they badger and badger. So the whole state of our political discussion becomes, which side are you on? Okay? So for me, they ask that question each time because they want me to pick a side in that. And I don't know if they like it or don't like it, that I don't fall for the trap, so to speak, because I think that is a silly description as to who's at fault, Tom Wolf or the legislature, Governor Wolf or the legislature. Why do I think it's silly? Because I think everybody shares some level of the responsibility. We are in a democratic republic. We have a system of checks and balances. That is our system. There is no way it could ever be just one entity's fault. And so what I say to them, I'll say to you tonight, everybody should be waking up every day trying to think, what can they do to try to fix it? Not who they should be trying to blame. And you want to talk about one thing that really does get me going, is that whenever They come close to having a deal when it falls apart. And the immediate attacks on Twitter, Facebook, social media, and in the press about blaming the other side, as if that pattern doesn't keep repeating itself and keep failing. So what I'm trying to do is do my part in trying to fix it, which is raise the awareness of what the budget stalemate is costing. To date, and this was as of January, school districts had to borrow just shy of $1 billion just to keep their doors open. And when I say $1 billion, I'm not talking about investing to build a new building, to hire new teachers. That's not what I'm talking about, simply to pay the light bill, to pay the current salaries of teachers that exist, to make sure that the extracurricular activities that are already scheduled are running. $1 billion. You know, tens of millions of dollars in interest costs for that borrowing. But I have worse news. The banks are going to stop giving the loans. If there isn't a budget agreement soon, banks are going to stop giving the loans. School districts are making us aware that they're just not going to try to even get the loan anymore. You know, my son plays high school baseball, so they had their first scrimmage. It was actually an exhibition game, whatever you want to call it, this Saturday. Now, forgetting aside that it was windy and snowy, and that's not the best place to watch a baseball game, and where West York's home field is. If there's wind anywhere in Pennsylvania that's not on a ski resort, it's on where their field is. So it was a little cold, but parents knew who I was, and on both teams, Bermudian Springs and West York, they were coming up to me. Now, I know both sides believe in their positions. And both sides may even believe they're winning the spin war. I had sort of a snapshot of middle Pennsylvania at this high school baseball game. Not one person, and I'm talking probably 30 that came up to me, not one person said, boy, I hope this side keeps zinging the other side. Not one. Not one. Now, I didn't ask anyone their party. Sometimes you can take a guess by the way they're describing the situation. But not one person, I didn't ask them for their party, and they didn't offer it. Here are the words that were used to describe the state of our Pennsylvania government from Pennsylvanians. Sad, despicable, we should bring pitchforks up there. Do they care about the kids? I'm just standing there by the concession stand drinking I had my hat on, I was just watching the baseball game. But they knew it wasn't, and we're engaging in the discussion. That is a snapshot of the phrases that were used. And here's the part that the elected officials need to keep in mind. For starters, everyone keeps talking about the younger kids. How would the families put their kids in daycare? And that's obviously a challenge. Let me start off with the seniors. Who here has kids? Who here has had a kid that graduated high school and went to college? What would happen if during their senior year, their school district shut down? We're talking about this today. I won't mention the school Vicky's daughter's looking at, because I don't want to tilt the playing field on, you're trying to get the scholarships. I don't want to tilt the playing field on that, because that would hurt your negotiating ability. But one of the requirements to college admissions is what? You have to graduate. If the school district closes, you can't graduate. What happens if that kid is trying to get a scholarship for academics or athletics? What happens if they're not necessarily really gifted, but they work really hard and they earn that degree, and they're going to go make a shot at it at community college and try to earn their way into Pitt, Penn State, Temple, or Millersville? You're pulling the rug out of those kids. And this would be the only state in the country that that's happened to. And we're not talking about a school district that had bad management. We're talking about something that could be happening relatively widespread. And just so everyone's aware, this could be happening pretty soon. The feedback we're getting is during the month of April, probably mid-April, is where it's really going to start to hit. So this is where we are right now. We're in a situation where school districts may close. Now, my daughter is in the elementary band. About 2 years ago, the school district that we're in, due to the first wave of cuts, had the possibility of eliminating the elementary band program. The school board meeting, the next meeting, had 300 parents. Grandparents, parents, 300. What do you think that meeting's going to be like if they're closing the school? Now, they ended up not doing it, but that was a proposal to get rid of the elementary band program, and 300 people showed up at the meeting. What would happen if 5% of the school districts in Pennsylvania were threatening to close? There might be more than 300 people who are pretty ticked off. There is a book that my dad sent me, and it's called The Dogs of War. It's about the Civil War. And so believe me, I'm going to segue into how I think we can fix this in a second. But The Dogs of War, and it is about the Civil War and what led up to the Civil War. And if you read the press accounts, because, I know what we think today, and you have MSNBC, Fox, CNN, where, depending on your point of view, you may think the other is more biased than the other. But back then, you had real party newspapers. I mean, there were newspapers that were really the mouthpieces of the political party. You may have a liberal or conservative editorial page editor, but the actual newspapers were cheerleaders for the party. If you read the accounts of what the South thought about the North and what the North thought about the South, both sides thought the other were cowards, and they were never actually going to fight. And then the war starts, and hell breaks loose, and nobody knows how to put it back in. Still more lives lost in that war than any other war in the history of the United States. Now, for myself, obviously the cause of ending slavery and preserving the Union were just. But what actually led to the fight in many respects was the idea that the other side would always blink. Now, I'm not saying it's the same. I want to be clear. But I think both sides in this budget stalemate kept assuming the other side would blink. And when neither side blinked, they didn't know how to get out of it. So one of the things as a lesson to take if you're involved in government and politics is you should try to avoid the war. And I don't mean it in a physical, violent sense. I'm talking about the war of we're going to just beat the other side. Because these kids that may not get their diploma on time, the parents that don't know how they're going to get their kids into a daycare, the people that are going to be thrown out to the wind, so to speak, for at least a period of time if this goes through. They're Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, Bull Moose, Independent. Some of them may not even vote, but guess what? You're supposed to represent all of them when you're in public service, not just the ones in your political party. And it does not mean that the fight that you are, in a sense, taking on isn't just and worthy, but it can't get to this point where it is now, where both sides don't know how to get out of it. So, for starters, if you're involved in public service, the thing to always keep in mind, and I think this is why the state of our federal government and our state government is in the shape it's in, is because there's too much emphasis put on beating the other side and not enough about doing the right thing. And again, I think everyone's in it, most people are in it, because they believe what they're fighting for. When you talk to Democrats, Republicans privately, they believe in what they're fighting for. It's not an act. But then finding where those rooms for compromise are. So I'll give you an example. If you just listen to the public statements, it appears that both sides are only about $150 million apart on the education funding. Okay? That's what you hear that. You will hear both sides say that we've got to make it more consumer friendly to buy wine and spirits. Both sides saying there's got to be some type of fix to our pension system. Both sides have recognized that there's a structural deficit to the state. I know some came a little late to that, but both sides admit it. And that the state's going to have to find a way to fix that. This has been the same position since the fall of last year. If you were to just look at that from 40,000 feet, that does not look like earth-shattering Grand Canyon chasm between the two parties. So I think there are ways to fix it. Now, I'll start with how I think there are some ways that I think our department has helped, at least could help in that. We have found in my first 3 years about $111 million in wasteful spending. Now, I want to be clear, that is not $1.7 billion. But $111 million is a pretty good start. Okay? However, inside of that $111 million, you have to be willing to take on some of the tougher challenges in that. For example, $25 million of that is waste that we have found in both school districts and charter schools. There is a bill that passed overwhelmingly in the House, very bipartisan. It would be about reforming the special education funding formula and the lease reimbursement system for charter schools. It could have saved, long-term, tens of millions of dollars. Passed the House almost unanimously. Went to the Senate, came out of committee almost unanimously. And then the bill just died. That one example, if that would have gotten to the governor's desk, that's something that could easily have saved tens of millions of dollars long-term for the state and would not have harmed one child. Yes, there may be some people on the back end that wouldn't have made as much money, but that's not what this is about. There was a way to do that that would have not have harmed the taxpayers and could have actually helped the taxpayers and actually also helped the kids at the same time. We have dealt with our audit of the Department of Environmental Protection. We basically began it from the timeline of the end of the Rendell administration and came up through the Corbett administration. We found 8 major findings of how the department was not doing enough to make sure our water was protected with all of the Marcellus Shale drilling. Now, if I were to take a survey in this room, and don't worry, I won't put the pressure on asking you to do it, there's probably a whole range of opinions about drilling in Marcellus Shale. I've yet to find anyone that says, look, that drinking water, forget about it. I don't care. I mean, we obviously see what happened in Flint, and I'm not saying that's anywhere close to Pennsylvania. We all see what happens in Flint. When you impact people's drinking water, you've dramatically impacted their lives, and for the kids, perhaps for decades to come. So we found the Department of Environmental Protection was not doing enough. We put forward 29 recommendations. To the credit of both the Corbett and the Wolf administration, all 29 of those recommendations are being implemented. That's an example of government that can work. That's something that happened. And it happened effectively. Yeah, the press conference where who was getting the blame, that might have got a little bit more press. But since that day, there's been a lot of progress in it. Now, this is sort of the funny part of politics. And I get it. We had 8 findings, 29 recommendations. The Corbett administration disagreed with all 8 findings, but agreed with all 29 recommendations. I get it. Now, the part that is, I guess you could say, I get it. Disappointing, but I get it. But if you worry about the right thing happening and not who gets the credit, this is actually fine. One of our recommendations, or one of our findings was they didn't have enough inspectors in the field. They disagreed with that. But on the day of my press conference, they announced they were going to hire 25 inspectors. Now, might have been just a coincidence in timing, might have been, but as we talk about in the office, at the end of the day, what's the difference if they did it because of the audit or they just decided it was the right thing to do? It happened. That's an example of state government actually working the way it's supposed to work. We did an audit of the Department of Education. Now, this one is actually staggering to begin with. The department had put together what is known as a school performance profile. Now, I know all of you have read the school performance profile characteristics. I know you studied it at night, and it really is a page turner. Almost as much as a page turner as the Yellow Book of Government Auditing Standards. It is, which reminds me, I think my one televised debate was here. Here's how wide the viewership was of that debate. We had a nice turnout here. I'm walking to my car afterwards, and my wife calls. I think she's going to say, you did good here, not so good there. That's not what she asked. Guess what she asked? Liz can't answer this because she knows. She asked, where are you? My immediate reaction was that she wasn't watching the debate then after I said that. That was my gut reaction. I said, hon, I'm the Democratic candidate for Auditor General, and I just had my first and only televised debate of the campaign. She goes, well, I don't know about that, but you got to pick up Ben at the football game, because it was band night at the football game. So I went and picked him up, and that was that, and not a lot of give and take on how the debate went. So I realized the school performance profile is not something that each of you, but you would expect the Department of Education to pay a lot of attention to it, even if each person in this room isn't. The school performance profile, by that standard that the department created, there were 561 schools that were deemed not school districts, schools. So you could have in a district where there's 5 buildings, 4 passing, 1 not. Just giving you an example. 561 schools that were deemed not passing. Guess what the Department of Education's plan was to fix them? Close your eyes and what do you see? You see nothing. That's what they had, no plan. The new secretary, we've met, we've gone over it, and they are now developing a plan to try to lift those schools up. Because whether they are, because your educational opportunity should not be dictated by what zip code you're in. And we know some of these schools were in more economically challenged areas. So we got to come up with a game plan to try to help these schools. And I know in both the Corbyn administration and the Wolf administration, there's been a tremendous effort on getting kids not going to school and starting the day hungry. It's happened below the radar screen. It's because all the evidence shows if a kid is hungry at the beginning of the day, it is almost impossible for them to succeed. There are also times where you find out, look, when I was a legislator, I typically was one of the ones advocating for more public school funding. But as Auditor General, even if that is my overall gut reaction, one of the things that I have found is that it's not just about the money, it's also how it's spent and making sure it's effective. And one of the things that doesn't seem to be nearly as part of the discussion is there tends to be a debate about whether you're pro or anti the money. We should all be for more effective spending of the money. Again, whether you are someone that thinks it's okay to raise taxes or you think they should be cut. But once we have a budget, everyone should be in agreement of making sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. So, for example, Mayor Peduto takes over as mayor of Pittsburgh. He was elected in 2013, takes over in early 2014. Early on in 2014, he calls and said, I need you to do an audit of the Pittsburgh School District. I am being told that they are on the verge of bankruptcy. We can't have that in Pittsburgh. Bill and I have known each other for a while. If he's called me, so we go in, we do the audit. It is an extensive audit. We crunch the numbers. We do this, we do that. We come out with a report that we were very proud of. Pittsburgh School District was not on the verge of bankruptcy. They actually had the largest fund balance of any school district in the state, $129 million. I have the press conference about that. I commend the superintendent, the whole team, boom, boom, boom. After the press conference, 4 school board members come up and go, are you sure about these numbers? I said, yeah. I mean, look, you could obviously be off a penny or two, but yeah, we're pretty confident. Oh, that's good because we have a tax increase scheduled for tonight. I said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. They verified our numbers were correct and they tabled it and then the next month voted to keep the millage rate as is. So that was, in a sense, Pittsburgh actually is able to invest more money in the early education programs, try to help their teachers more without raising taxes because of the work we did. That's, again, an area where we can be more effective with the resource we have. Having said that, we have found some districts that are in dire need of funding. The Stowe Rock School District. One of probably the biggest mistakes Governor Corbett made from forgetting the politics of all this stuff on the education side of it was eliminating the charter school reimbursement. There are dozens of school districts all over the state that are in very tough financial straits now because that funding was taken away from the district. We have to find a way to fix that. Our audits have shown, and even Governor Corbett, close to the end of his reelection effort, conceded that that was a mistake. So when something happens like that, where even the person that made the cut concedes it's a mistake, you'd like to think there'd be some bipartisan compromise to try to at least restore that funding because the districts it was taken away from, they're the ones that are now most financially challenged and most in danger of closing. We audited the Department of Community and Economic Development. We saw that they were giving out grants for job creation. Now, there is an intellectual discussion about whether we should be in the business of doing it. Some people believe that the government can help spearhead the job creation. Some people think, hey, tax rates, infrastructure, workforce development, let everyone else compete for themselves. There are two, few schools of thought there. As Auditor General, our job is to make sure that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. We found out during our audit, the department said they met their job creation numbers. They gave out, I'm going to make it easy, 2 grants, hypothetically speaking, with the goal of creating 200 jobs. And they would meet it. However, one of the companies would create 0 jobs, and the other would create 200. Therefore, they met their overall number. Our take was that 46% of the grant awardees didn't meet their job numbers. So we need to find out why that's taking place. But the bigger concern I had, and even companies that got the grants go, yeah, like we kind of felt this could be tightened up. Guess what was the accountability to make sure the jobs were actually created? This is now government money being handed out. Anybody want to have a guess? The owner of the business had to sign a letter saying we created the jobs. Anybody feel 100% comfortable with that? The Department of Labor and Industry has payroll data. We said, simple solution. Work with your Department of Labor and Industry on the payroll data to see if they're actually matching up. Now, having said that, there's some people say that could be seen as an infringement on private enterprise. I actually agree, but if you're accepting the government money, you've now, in my opinion, accepted the reality that the taxpayers deserve accountability for that money. If you don't want the government money, that's a whole different discussion. But we can look, and this department now is beginning to look at the payroll data to make sure that the jobs are being created. So these are sometimes the little victories that can happen that can make Pennsylvania run a little better, fix some of the problems, and make our state better. But the state of our Pennsylvania government, to come back to the beginning theme, we've got problems. And we've got problems because structurally we're in two different camps. It's not people and people, it's Democrat and Republican. And we got to find a way to bridge those two gaps. There's always been political divisions in this country. It wasn't all rose petals for Franklin Roosevelt, and it wasn't all rose petals for Ronald Reagan. And by the way, nor should it be. Let me be clear, nor should it be. Part of an engaged democracy is having citizens ask hard questions, holding their leaders accountable. But it's also about finding ways to get things done to move the ball forward. It's, former New York Governor Cuomo, not his son who's the governor now, but Mario Cuomo said, you campaign in poetry and govern in prose. For those maybe a little bit more timely, did anyone here ever watch the show The West Wing? And after Santos wins, they're in the transition, and Josh is basically sleep deprived, and he's yelling at his staff, and his hair's all messed up and tie's all messed up. And he said, you guys don't get it. Governing is 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And by that, for non-football fans, that means sometimes you're not always throwing the 80-yard pass. You're just trying to make it a little better one step at a time. And if we can get back to sort of that being the philosophy, is trying to win everything at once and defeat the other side, I think we can get back to being a very strong state government. And if we do that, I think Pennsylvania is poised for great things in the future. If you go to Pittsburgh and just ignore the state budget for a second and just go to Pittsburgh and see some of the great things that are happening in the city of Pittsburgh, I mean, it'll knock your socks off. I grew up in the city. I saw, some of the mills close when I was a kid. 20,000 people losing their job overnight. The city is reborn now. I mean, really, my mom lives in Lawrenceville. I mean, just there's 3 yoga studios within inside our house. Believe me, there weren't 3 yoga studios in Lawrenceville when I was growing up. But but there's young people moving in, Google's moving in, CMU's taking off, Pitt. You got a healthcare industry. They've revitalized themselves. Now look, there's always going to be problems, but heading it really in a great direction. I think some of the things that are happening with our state universities, Pitt, Penn State, Temple, really becoming international universities now, and to their credit. So we have some really, really amazing things happening in Pennsylvania. We just have to get some of these basics back in order. And the number one thing, I think, is getting public education right. If we have a clean environment, solid education system, and a competitive tax structure, I think Pennsylvania can knock any other state's socks off. Because our infrastructure, our workforce, our assets, both from a park standpoint, a university standpoint, I mean, other countries, let alone other states, would be dying to have it. So we have those here, but we just have to figure out how to utilize them the best way possible. And right now, we're not. And hopefully, some of the audits we've done of our state system of higher education, our Pennsylvania Department of Education, our job creation programs, and highlighting the cost of the budget stalemate can help be a part of heading us in the right direction. Because again, coming back to the thing I started off with, the easy thing is to blame. The hard thing is to take responsibility and do what you can do to try to change that. And that's what I'm going to do every single day. So hopefully I've given you a little insight about how we can do that in the Department of Auditor General, and more than happy to have any questions. Thank you very much. Fire away. Who's up?
Very briefly, if you could, what would you say that we as individuals sitting here would be able to do to make either your job or the legislature's job ready? Because I know that I feel very disconnected from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to tell you you should make anyone's job easier, but I do think calling up and saying, A, if this is what you believe, the current situation is unacceptable, if that's what you believe. And two, offer some thoughts on what you think could be done to fix it, what you as a Pennsylvanian would be willing to take, good, bad, or indifferent. And also what your priorities are. And what you think, even if they're not your priorities, what would be the most important thing for the state. And I think if they hear that, because I was in the legislature, the no crowd, regardless of the issue, the people that are against something, they get heard. I mean, I remember one time I proposed a bill banning text messaging while driving. In a public opinion poll, only 93% of the voters in Pennsylvania agreed with it. Only 93%. That's a tongue-in-cheek. When I gave my floor speech on us finally passing it, I said, have the courage to stand up to the 4% that disagree with you. People didn't get the humor in that. But I had more emails from people that disagreed with it. Now, I thought it was the right thing to do for public safety, and my joke was, as a Star Wars fan, unless you're Yoda, you can't text and drive. It's actually impossible. Even if you think you can, let me tell you, you can't. I think Yoda would even struggle. I mean, he'd have he'd have that issue. Now, as a Jedi, he could see things happen before they happen, but he'd have the whole pedal issue. But even there, he would lack focus in that moment. So I think Yoda would struggle. We would all struggle. So you can't do it. So we eventually had it passed. But the point is, even on that, something that actually the overwhelming part of the public wanted to have happen, you hear from the no's more. Politicians rarely hear from the people who are open-minded about the tough votes. And I'm just going to tell you, like the no letters come flying in, emails, Facebook posts. Look on Twitter. I mean, how many people start off the tweet, go, hey, I'd love to have a reasonable discussion about this very controversial issue, and people then just decide to start tweeting very reasonable solutions to that very complex problem. There's a certain candidate for a high office that thrives in not having complicated tweets that end with various descriptive terms of other candidates and people, which that's Twitter, right? And by the way, I love tweeting about Star Wars and the pirates because I just stopped the idea of like, well, give me your thoughts on curing the world. I mean, it's just, I'll maybe tweet interesting articles or something I think is an interesting point of view. But for the most part, complex, it usually becomes an attack mode on somebody else. Pick up the phone and call and say, here's where my thoughts are on this. I mean, believe me, they'd love to hear from you. And you'd probably get them more of a sense of what someone, is more sort of center right or center left would think. And That helps them find where can the compromise be on this.
We were advised in Governor Wood to negotiate with the Republicans in the House. But what Republicans did you tell him to go to? Do you know, deliver the Republican vote in the House?
First of all, he has talked to those individuals. There is a difference in the politics today that I'm going to come back to. This is not on Governor Wolf or the legislature. It is just a reality. I will give you even what I think is a funny story for my own sake. This is now more of a bottom-up operation than a top-down. The leaders can't come into caucus today. They can try and say, I shook hands with the governor, now you have to vote for this. That's how it used to happen. The 1991 budget deal with Governor Casey and Republican legislators, the deal with former Governor Thornburg and Democratic legislators, that's what happened. Governor negotiated with leaders walked into caucus and said, here's the deal, you have to vote for it. Now the leaders come in and say, here's the deal, you have to vote for it, and the members get up and say, now we're voting you out as leader. Okay? So there is no one member that can deliver that. There may be people that are respected for a point of view, but no one member comes in and says, I got 50 votes. If they say that, guess what they are? They're a liar. They're a liar if they say that. Or they're overplaying their hand. What today's system really requires is for the leaders to actually find out how far they can go from their own caucus. Then walk in and meet with the governor and say, here's where my side is in the negotiating. The governor offers his perspective of how far, and then they move a little bit closer. Then they can go back to the caucus and say, okay, here's where the governor bent a little bit, but here's where we bent a little bit. How much further can I go? That's how it really needs to work today. It is a much more complicated process, but is a much more ground up. Today, you have situation where members are in caucus, and the leaders are telling them what they think to do, and the members will be attacking their leadership on Twitter. I mean, that actually happens. I know for myself, one time I had an issue with leadership one time, and they said, and they did it with a chuck. I said, in the old days, we'd put your office in a closet, which is what would have happened. And I said, yeah, and I'd probably be the most popular legislator in the world the next day if you did that, because think about that if that happened today. Okay, people say this now that have been around the Capitol for a while. They should just take his staff. That'll teach him a lesson, or her a lesson. Okay, we need more women in the legislature, but that maybe would help the situation, but that's another conversation for another day. That's what they say, because that used to happen. You didn't vote with leadership, office gets yanked. Then that member would say, oh, I need to get back in good graces with leadership. Now today, imagine a Republican legislator having their office staff yanked with Facebook, Twitter, blogs, talk radio, because they didn't vote for a tax increase. Imagine that. Put yourself down. Forget leadership should do this and they need to throw down the hammer. Imagine a scenario where a Republican legislator has their office staff yanked because they wouldn't vote for a tax increase. That person is now the leading candidate for governor in 2018. Anybody here disagree with that? They would be literally in every newspaper. They would have a talk show. The talk radio would be, and eventually not only would they get their staff back, but they'd still be popular. And they still wouldn't vote for the tax increase because now they'd be more emboldened to be against it. And the same thing for a Democrat. Imagine if a Democrat had their staff yanked because they wouldn't vote for some cut to the environmental programs. They would be at some Washington, D.C. dinner feted as the legislator of the year. The profile encourages. They'd be on Time magazine. And I'm only slightly exaggerating with this. That's the put it. So to come back to there's no way you negotiate with one member and you get the deal. It is a much harder process and more of a small d democratic process where you have to get consent from the membership to find out how far you can go.
Can you describe the function of your office
say, the revenue department, because over time, and I'll give you a specific example so you can build on it. Just recently, it's come to light that the state police is funded through the motor license fund, and that's kind of slipped through.
It's actually been happening for a while, but I think it's more come to light
It's
recently.
It's only since 1979.
Yeah.
But it's inched up to the breaking point. So it's one of those large issues that probably contributes to
Oh, yeah.
some of the impasse. Would that be a good example to sort through the state of Pennsylvania government, how the transparency wasn't available at the time?
It's actually a jigsaw puzzle on this. So the question is about state police being paid out of the motor license fund. There's a couple things that are part of this. Number one, in areas that drop their police force, state police pick up the coverage. Many local governments are dropping their police department now. They feel they can't afford it. Maybe they feel they don't need it. Some of them are worried about long-term pension costs. There's a whole host of reasons why that is happening. But what happens when the state police has to cover more territory with less members? You don't have to be a math major or a public safety expert to figure out that that is a challenge. Then you throw in the other component that we have significant infrastructure needs that motor license fund, people think that's what it's all going for, is road and bridge work, but it actually pays the state police as well. The easy answer is, stop paying them out of the motor license fund. That all goes to road and bridge work. That is the cleaner way to do it budgetary-wise. But if you do that, then what do you need to do? You need to find other revenue to pay for the state police when they have now more territory, and by all rights, they should be hiring more people. So it has come to light recently. It has been, as you pointed out, since 1979 that has happened. And really since about 2005-06, I think it was 2004, Governor Rendell first commissioned his first transportation report. One of the big recommendations was finding another revenue source for the state police to free up that roughly $500 million for road and bridge work. And it hasn't happened yet because there hasn't been an agreement on what the other revenue source could be. But my bigger concern with the state police, and that's a concern, my bigger concern is I think they're being stretched too thin, and I'm worried about long-term public safety when you just don't have enough troopers out there patrolling enough area because people have just gotten rid of their local police departments.
Could that be what the problem is, not the politics of the governor and the legislature, but the structure of Pennsylvania with 5,000 townships, 500 and some school districts? I mean, we're so balkanized in this state, 62 counties.
Yeah, I have, for starters, the short answer is, does the setup in Pennsylvania lead to some of these challenges? The answer is yes. Now, some of those things are also opportunities too. Let me start off with one of the areas I think can be addressed. Okay, we have 500 school districts. Now, I'm not someone that advocates, just for myself, the county-wide system like Maryland has. I'll tell you why. Virginia, some other states have the county-wide system. We have so many different sizes of counties population-wise that I'm not sure that makes the most sense. Having said that, I do think we could have more administrative cooperation. So, for example, I think we could have one teacher healthcare contract in the state. Wouldn't it be better if the state of Pennsylvania had the ability to negotiate that contract as opposed to a district by district? I think we should be buying our football equipment, our band equipment. That should stuff be maybe by IU unit or by county or maybe the Department of Education, but doing some system like that where we could take advantage of the enormous size of our state to get better deals. I think that we certainly could do. In our municipal pensions, for example, you go to the local government issue, we have more municipal pension plans in Pennsylvania than the rest of the country combined. Now, no, that's not like, I didn't lose my train of thought there. No, there's more in Pennsylvania than the rest of the country combined. We have a system in Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System. Pretty much every plan that is in that system is actually in pretty good shape. The ones that are outside are not. And why? Most of them because they're paying exorbitant fees. They have administrative waste. If we could put more into the Pennsylvania municipal retirement system, it would save administrative waste and get us better fee structure. At a minimum, you do that. So again, sometimes, what I talked about, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, you could do that so that doesn't blow up the whole system of Pennsylvania government and can actually improve the system. Here's an example. If you pay fees for your pension plan in the Pennsylvania municipal retirement system, and again, it's not consolidating the plans, it's consolidating the administration. You pay between $250 and $350 per member per year. Guess how much the city of Reading pays per member per year? Just as a guess, it's more than $350. This is where the price is right. You probably want to say $351 just to keep you where you could win at any number. But if you guessed $4,000, you'd be right. I said that at the Greater Reading Chamber of Commerce. The controller and the mayor didn't know. They were at the highest in the state, didn't know. Guess what the residents of Reading, what their benefit is. By the way, either the first or second most poverty-stricken city in the United States, according to Pew and all the, so it's either 1 or 2, and by the way, that's not a ranking you want to win. Guess what the benefit they are getting for the highest fee structure in Pennsylvania? Less than nothing. They're not even beating the stock index fund. If they put all their money in Vanguard, their fee would be about $200 per member per year. Now, they go by a basis point issue, but still, it would end up being about $200 per member per year. And they'd at least be getting the stock index fund return. These are the things that drive you crazy, but that's a way you can, again, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, you can at least get some waste out of the system while not hurting the average retiree, average cop or firefighter who's retired and taking away their pension simply because they didn't do anything wrong, but because of bad management by the city.
General, periodically we hear issues of procurement and issues of outsourcing and issues of insourcing and that kind of thing. Have you or your department ever done any studies which have indicated that procurement, that for instance outsourced services is a good thing, or studies which indicate that keeping things in-house is a good thing?
I haven't seen a study on that. I've generally believed that minus a big price disparity, I'm a pro Pennsylvania when we're contracting, because I just think there's a multiplier effect of that. You know, if it's a Pennsylvania company getting the bid versus outside the state, I think, there's employment, there's other issues that go into it. But no, to the best of my knowledge, there's never been a study, and there may have been, just to my knowledge, on the pros and cons of what the multiplier effect is on that. But to me, if it's close, I always want to see the Pennsylvania company get it. And even when it's a school district or a local borough, I'd rather them see higher local, because I just think there's a multiplier effect of that. If it's close. If it's a wide disparity, that's a different discussion. Other questions? If not, I end up right on time. So everyone, thank you very much for